Welcome to 21st Sports Recap and Reaction for the Carolina Panthers at the Atlanta Falcons in their Week 16 matchup played December 27th, 2015 as these NFC South Division rivals went at it with playoff implications on the line. Carolina needing to win to secure home field advantage throughout the playoffs. They already had the division title in the South and a first round bye, and Atlanta needing a win to stay alive, to keep their playoff hopes alive, as the Falcons would need to win out, and they needed the Vikings to lose out for them to have a chance at that last wild card spot. Well, the Panthers would get the ball first in this game, and on their very first possession of the game, they drove downfield. They got into Atlanta territory, down into the red zone, and on first and goal from the 8, Cam Newton took it in himself, an 8-yard touchdown run, and with the extra point by Gano, it was 7-0 Panthers over the Falcons. So that was after the first possession of the game. So now the Falcons would get the ball, and they would eat up the rest of the first quarter on their first possession of the game as they put together quite the long drive. And they brought the first quarter to a close in the red zone, and they started up the second quarter with a first and goal on the 4, and Devonta Freeman scored on the 4-yard touchdown run. Shayne Graham added the extra point, and this game was tied at 7 apiece. So both teams on their first possession score, and the first quarter was already gone with just 2 possessions in the game, 1 apiece. So the Panthers would get the ball for the second time in this game, and they would end up punting after 8 plays. And then the Falcons, they would punt after 7 plays on their second possession. Now the Panthers would take over with about 8 minutes still left in the first half on their own 15, and they would get into Atlanta territory. But then on 2nd and 1 from the 21, Cam Newton was sacked by Babineau and Beerman. They dropped him for a 16-yard loss, and that brought the game to the 2-minute warning. And then after an incomplete pass on 3rd down and a penalty on 4th down would push the Panthers all the way back to the 37, where they would end up punting. So they didn't come away with any points on that possession, although they'd been on the verge of the red zone. So they punt the ball to the Falcons, and the Falcons would bring the first half to a close. So the Falcons would then get the ball first in the second half. The game still tied up at 7 apiece, and Atlanta would bring the ball down into field goal range. So their drive ended up stalling on the 25 after Ryan was sacked on 3rd down by Short. And out came Shayne Graham to attempt a 43-yard field goal, but it was no good. So the field goal was no good, and that was about midway point in the third quarter, as there was just over 8 minutes still left in the third, as the Panthers got the ball for the first time here in the second half, and they would start off with it on their own 33. They got into Atlanta territory, down into the red zone, but their drive would stall on the 15, and Gano would come out to attempt a 33-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and now the Panthers were in the lead by 3 with the score Carolina 10, Atlanta 7, with about 5.5 left still in the third. The Falcons would come right back, though, as they would take over on their own 20 after the touchback on the kickoff, and they wasted little time as they had first picked up a first down, and then on 3rd and 13 from the 30, Matt Ryan airs it out, and Julio Jones makes a spectacular catch over Luke Kuechly's head, reaching over. It would have been a penalty in basketball, but that's fair in football. And he reaches over him, grabs the football out of the air, and takes it into the end zone for a 70-yard touchdown by Julio Jones, and the Falcons were now back in the lead, and with the extra point by Shayne Graham, it was Atlanta 14, Carolina 10, and that was with just over 2 minutes still left in the third. So now the Panthers would get the ball, and they would bring the third quarter to a close, and they would open up the fourth quarter, but their drive would stall on their own 37, and so they would end up punting after 6 plays on this possession. And now the Falcons would take over on their own 10-yard line, backed up against their own end zone. But on first down, Matt Ryan went to Julio Jones. He picked up 30 yards. and a first down at the 40. They got into Carolina territory, but then on 3rd and 10 from the 37, the football kind of goes over Matt Ryan's head. It was a bad snap, and the fumble, and Norman recovers for the Panthers. And so now Carolina would take over on the Atlanta 36 after that botched snap and the fumble and the recovery by Norman. So the Panthers would take over in field goal range, but they were not able to get a first down. So Gano would come out on 4th and 3 from the 29 to attempt the 47-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and it was now a 1-point game with the score Atlanta 14, Carolina 13, with just under 8 minutes left to play in the fourth quarter. So now the Falcons would get the ball after the kickoff on their own 21, and they wasted little time moving the ball up to midfield and into Carolina territory. They would get down to the red zone, but their drive stalled at the Carolina 19, and Shayne Graham came out to attempt the 37-yard field goal. He had missed one earlier in this half to open up the second half, but this one was good. The 37-yarder went through the uprights, and that extended the Falcons' lead to 4 with the score Atlanta 17, Carolina 13, with about 2.5 minutes still left on the clock. So now Carolina would take over after the touchback on the kickoff at their own 20, and they would bring the game to the 2-minute warning. And then coming out of the 2-minute warning, 2 plays after, they would be faced with a 3rd and 5 from the 37, and an incomplete pass would bring up 4th down. They would elect to go for it, and the pass was incomplete. It was questionable. Olsen wanted a flag, but no flag on the call as it was broken up. And so the Panthers turned the ball over on downs with less than 2 minutes left to play. So now Atlanta would get the ball at the Carolina 37 after the turnover on downs, but then a false start would push them back to the 42, and they would fail to pick up a first down, and they really failed to move any time off the clock, as they would end up attempting a 54-yard field goal with 1:30 still left on the clock from the 36 of Carolina, and Shayne Graham puts the 54-yarder through the uprights, and it was now a 7-point lead for the Falcons with the score Atlanta 20, Carolina 13. As I said, 1:30 still left to play. So Carolina would get one last chance, and they had the ball on their own 20 after the touchback on the kickoff. And on first down, Cam Newton went to Philly Brown. He picked up 19 yards and a first down at the Carolina 39. But on 1st and 10 from the 39, just over a minute left, Cam Newton drops back and he's sacked by Vic Beasley, who knocks the ball loose, and Claiborne recovers, and that was all she wrote. As the Falcons, all they had left to do was for Matt Ryan to take 2 knees in the victory formation as the Atlanta Falcons pull off the upset victory 20-13. They keep their playoff hopes alive, and they end the Carolina Panthers' 18-game winning streak in the regular season, going back to the final 4 games of last year and the first 14 of this year, as they are no longer undefeated. And now, the 72 Dolphins are popping the champagne, as they say, but the Panthers are undefeated and no more. The Falcons now 8-7 on the season, keeping their playoff hopes alive, 4-3 at home, and the Panthers now 14-1. They're 7-1 on the road this season. Their lone loss on the road. They'll be finishing up at home. And of course, the Panthers still have a chance to clinch home field advantage if the Packers beat the Cardinals in the late game, the 4 o'clock games, East Coast time. But the Falcons with the win. And the thing is, I'm not shocked by this one. I know everybody thought that the Panthers were going to win this one easily. The thing you got to remember is it is extremely tough in football to beat a team twice in the regular season. Of course, that's your division rivals, and already, they had done that. But for the Falcons to beat them twice, especially the second time in Atlanta, that was going to be a tough thing to do, as you're so familiar with your division opponents, and regardless of what happens the first time around, it's really tough to beat them twice in the regular season. It's one of the toughest things to do in all of sports, and that was why this game, I thought that the Falcons actually, despite all the evidence and everything on paper that said that the Panthers should win this game, I thought the Falcons actually did have a chance to knock the Panthers from the ranks of the undefeated. And it's an interesting thing, too, to think, with this loss, where does the Panthers, where they go from here? Do they, take this loss and let that, remind them, yes, losses can happen, and that's just motivation to play hard going into the postseason? Or could this possibly derail them? You want to be hot going into the postseason. You want to have a winning streak. They were the hottest team in football. Of course, now the Chiefs are the hottest team. Of course, that's over in the AFC. But I think that the loss really, shouldn't affect the Panthers too much. I wouldn't really put too much, stock in this loss. Like I said, it's kind of the thing where on the road against a division rival, it's a tough, win to get. It's tough to sweep that season series. But in this game, Matt Ryan came up huge. The defense of the Falcons came up big time as well. But let's look at Matt Ryan's numbers. 23 for 30, 306 passing yards, and a touchdown. Devonta Freeman, 22 carries, 73 yards, and a rushing touchdown. He also had 3 receptions for 17 yards, which gave him 90 total yards on the day. And those things, they stayed committed to the run. Of course, when they needed to kill the clock there at the end, they weren't so committed to the run, but they still ended up coming away with the victory, even with the poor clock management there in the final 2 minutes. But their defense, came up big time. But Julio Jones had a monster game, 9 receptions, 178 receiving yards, and a touchdown. Roddy White, 5 receptions, 67 receiving yards. And for the Panthers, Cam Newton, 17 of 30, just 142 passing yards. He also had 7 carries and 46 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Cameron Artis-Payne had 5 carries for 49 yards. And Fozzie Whitaker, 5 carries for 32 yards. Greg Olsen had 4 receptions for 40 yards. Philly Brown, 3 receptions for 39 yards. Jericho Cotchery, 4 receptions for 24 yards. Look at the kickers in this game. Shayne Graham, 2 for 3 on the field goals, 2 for 2 on the extra points. Graham Gano, 2 for 2 on the field goals, 1 for 1 on the extra points. And on defense, Vic Beasley with a sack and a forced fumble. Of course, that was the one that put the nails in the coffin for the Panthers in this game. Bierman and Babineau each had a half a sack. And for the Panthers, Quan Short with 2 sacks. Look at the team stats, 21 first downs for the Falcons, 18 first downs for the Panthers. On third down, the Falcons were 9 for 15, 60% conversion rate. Carolina 4 for 10, 40% on third downs. They went for it once on fourth and did not convert. They turned the ball over on downs. And then we look at the total net yards, 373 for the Falcons, 268 for the Panthers. On the ground, Carolina netted 155, and Atlanta netted just 77. Is the Panthers 7.8 yards on the ground per carry, just 2.6 for Atlanta. And then we look at the net passing yards, 296 for the Falcons. Matt Ryan sacked twice for a loss of 10 yards total. And total net yards for the Panthers, 113. Cam Newton was sacked twice, losing a total of 29 yards. Look at the penalties in this game, not very many. Just 4 against Carolina for 40 yards, 3 against Atlanta for 20 yards. The Panthers had a fumble, which they lost. The Falcons had 2 fumbles. They lost 1 and recovered 1. And in the red zone, both teams 1 for 2, 50%. Time of possession, 35 minutes, 38 seconds in favor of the Falcons to just 24 minutes, 22 seconds for Carolina. So this is a tight, hard-fought game. It came all the way down to the wire. And the Panthers had a chance all the way down to the end, but the Falcons just played some exceptionally well defense. Dan Quinn, of course, is a defensive-minded coach, and they were playing in this game the way they had been playing in the first half of this season before they had their mid-season collapse. But they still are alive. They keep themselves alive and in a position, of course, they're going to need some help as they need the Vikings to lose. And we'll see what happens with Minnesota against New York. That's the Sunday night game against the Giants. Of course, that one's in Minnesota, and the Vikings play pretty tough at home. But as for the Falcons, they did what they could to keep themselves alive. For the Panthers, like I said, I wouldn't put too much stock in this. Losing to a division rival on the road, these things happen to the best of teams, as we see in this game, because the Panthers still are the team with the best record in the NFL, and they still are on track. If history plays itself out the way it has, as history repeats itself, then the Panthers are, on their way to Super Bowl 50. Of course, they have to play those games and win the games to get there. But the Panthers are still definitely, they win the South. They've already clinched that. They already had clinched a first-round bye. They're going to be watching to see what happens with that Arizona and Green Bay game. If the Cardinals lose, then the Panthers get home field advantage. Or, of course, if the Panthers win next week, then they'll take home field advantage throughout the playoffs. But this game, like I said, I really would put this one up to the fact that it's a division game, and the Falcons played really good. The Panthers, they gave them what they could, but they just, against the division rival, they weren't able to get the job done on the road. But they still, it was a pretty good performance by their defense, but their offense just not really getting it done. And they just, no John Stewart was, part of the thing too. Without John Stewart there, he's been kind of the heart and soul, especially of their running game. The Falcons really coming up big time on defense. And of course, Matt Ryan having a pretty good day, not having any turnovers. So he did a good job. And of course, Julio Jones, that big, huge 70-yard touchdown, ended up being really the play of the game, other than that defensive stop at the end there with the strip by Beasley. But let me know what you think in the comments section below. Definitely interested to read your thoughts and opinions. Thank you very much for listening. It is greatly appreciated. I hope you're having a good day and having a great weekend and enjoying all the sports.